Hello my beautiful subscribers and welcome to this video that I'm bringing you. It's a spiritual lesson video. I do bring them every now and again. And this spiritual video lesson is being brought to you off the back of a comment, which I think is a really, really important comment. It was a comment based on how do we learn assertiveness and how do we learn to find our voice? In this comment, somebody was speaking about how they have people pleased for years and how they have allowed lots of behaviours to go on. But what they didn't want to do is suddenly become this ogre where they're putting in these really strong boundaries and getting angry and doing, behaviours that don't feel in congruence to who they are. That means in line with who they are. Because when we're healing and growing, we don't want to suddenly start, if you have been a people pleaser for a very, very long time, if you've been somebody that has allowed or without meaning to allowed certain behaviours, you're not suddenly just going to stand up and say, well, I'm not happy with this is not okay. And because it can come quite dominating, it can come across as uncomfortable. And when something's too uncomfortable, that is when people step back from it and don't continue to do it. Especially when if you step into doing that straight away, you're going to come up against resistance from people. And the reason for that is because people, for one, don't like change. For two, don't understand this role you're now playing, and they'll think you're suddenly being weird or different or strong-minded. They won't understand where it's coming from. And this will leave you out of sorts. And when we feel too out of sorts, we absolutely go back to comfortableness, don't we? And we slip into comfortableness without even realising. We can quite often slip into behaviours that we used to do and think, God, why did I do that? Why did I say yes to that? Why did I end up in that situation or conversation? When we are starting to realise that we have been a people pleaser and that we have entered into behaviours of letting people get away with a lot. Leave that dog toy. And we're realising that this actually leads us to unhappiness and not having peace. The first thing that we need to do, we can quite often speak about finding our voice. You've got to tell them how you feel. You've got to say no more. You've got to put boundaries in. But that's not where you start, because you're not going to suddenly start to say no more. You're not going to suddenly start to say, I'm not okay with that. You're not going to do that because you haven't built the confidence up to stand by that. You haven't built the sense of self up enough to even have the smallest bit of confidence to do that. So what you have to start by doing is becoming aware. And how this happened in my life is I started to, sorry if you can hear seagulls out, I live by the sea and the seagulls are prolific today. The one day I want to record. Yes, just my fucking luck. Learning self-awareness is really important. Self-awareness around people. I'm going to take these bangles off because they jingle too much. Self-awareness around people. Looking at the people that you have within your life, how do they make you feel? And going through, how does your parents make you feel? How does your sibling make you feel? How does your friends make you feel? And starting this journey of recognising how do you behave when you're around each of them. So when you're around your mum, do you go back to child mode? Do you appease them? When you're around your brother or sister, do you get angry with them quite quickly? Do you judge them? Do you feel sorry for them? When you're around your friend, do you divulge more than you want? Do you get in gossipy conversations? The first part of becoming assertive to knowing what your needs are, when you're saying no, when you need to say yes, is knowing first and foremost who you have around you. Because understanding who you have around you is going to empower you and enable you along the way to recognise how do you need to address those relationships. So if you have parents who every time you're around, they talk about things that trigger you. Putting in boundaries straight away with these parents wouldn't work. You know, that's not the role they're used to with you. That's not the role you're used to. They would get defensive. So firstly, you recognizing that that's what happens when you're around them. You can start to go, okay, well, when I'm going to go around my parents today, the likelihood of us talking about situations that are uncomfortable are high. So I'm going to come up with some coping strategies so that when I'm around them, I can manage this. Some of my coping strategies were changing conversations and topics. So when something come up, changing it. And then in time, I was able to say to them, I'm not okay with that conversation because it doesn't make me feel very good. But initially, I had to recognise how they did behave around me. Were they dominating? Did they expect a lot of me? What roles were we both playing? Well, I would appease my parents and I would slip into agreeing with everything they said and suppressing a lot of myself. So what I had to recognise, for one, how much energy, how much time do I want to spend around them? You know, if you're spending all of your time around those people and they're not mentally healthy for you, you're not going to feel good. And this is the real stark realisation that you're not going to feel good if you're surrounding yourself by unhealthy people, whether you love them or not. You've got to recognise for your own benefit, just being around them and managing them is not enough for a healthy mind. You have to manage it so that it doesn't consume your mind. If you want to see your sister every day, but every day you argue with your sister, you have to make a choice whether that's a healthy relationship to maintain at that level. Maybe you could see her once a week. Maybe you could phone her and not always go to her house. Maybe you could limit the conversations you're talking about. But if you're going there every day but expecting not to be triggered or expecting not to come away feeling drained, knowing how the relationship is, you've got an expectation you're never going to meet. So it's really important for you to recognise the roles that you're playing with people. So I used to look at each role. Every time I talk, my throat chakra plays up because I always get nervous about talking about these things because it triggers people. Looking at each relationship in your life. And actually, some of those closest relationships, potentially having a conversation with them about, I'm on a path of self-discovery. And if these are people that you can't have those conversations with, then you really have to assess how much energy you're giving them. If you can't have open and honest, the relationships we need in our life, for them to be built healthily, we need trust. We need to have, where we can, healthy communication. That no one's perfect. People have got their own wounds and struggle with their own communication. But if they love you and they love them, you know, the relationship, they will try to communicate the best they can. So if you can't, to any level, have an open conversation with that person and say to them that you're healing or growing, I would say you need to question how much energy. And, you know, we can say all day long, well, they're my parents. If they are not bringing anything that's healthy to your life and you're struggling in their energy, you're struggling in the relationship, there's lots expected of you, there's arguments that keep erupting, you have to ask yourself, is that what you want your future to be? Because learning to manage your family is good, because you don't want to, you know, you don't want to cut all of your family members out of your life, because building bonds with people is important. But when you're not aware of the roles that you play, you have an expectation of how you think they should be. Whether my sister, they should be like that. Well, they're not. Or through whatever their own wounds, they can't be. My mum, she shouldn't keep doing that, but she does. So you have to understand the roles that you're all playing so you can know how you show up. That is first and foremost the level of assertiveness you need. You know, people believe that assertiveness is just based on telling them what you need. You have to show people also what you need. If people are seeing you pulling away, you can, you know, that's when you can communicate well. You know, you have to recognize if these people are people you can communicate with. If they say you're pulling away, sometimes you have to make your own excuses as to why, you know, I'm doing lots or I've got lots on. You know, you've got to do things to preserve your mental health. Building bonds with people is important. Again, so learning, my hair is absolutely annoying me. Learning to manage them and manage your relationship is important. but you're never going to change them. So this is why self-awareness is key, because when you're self-aware, you can recognize their behaviors and that you're not going to change them. You can recognize there's only ever what you can do, not what they can do. So when you're unaware and you don't work on self-awareness, you'll go in with loads of expectations of how things should be. And you'll always be disappointed because it's not like that. It's not getting better. It's not changing. You have to come to the realization when behaviors are long-term, they're not going to. Unless that person really wants to change or is open to you communicating with them, your journey isn't necessarily going to be one with them, in the sense that they're not going to be not on your journey, but they're not going to have as big a place as you think they're going to. You know, if you could spend time, if you would become aware of your own behaviors. So also self-awareness with relationships is not about managing them, it's about managing yourself. It's about looking at the roles that they are so that you can look at the roles that you're playing. You know, like again, I'll say being assertive and saying no and having boundaries is literally, 10-20% of the whole story. In that point, you don't generally get there until you've built this bit up. You know, you can't get to saying no more and putting in boundaries until you've built enough self-awareness and self-esteem to actually know how to manage things. Because when you start to build your self-esteem and realise, well, actually, when I'm around my parents, I act like a child myself. I'm like, can you help me? Can you do this? Can you do that? Well, actually, maybe I don't want to be as reliant on my parents. Then you can take ownership for the fact that maybe you're playing a role of child still. Maybe you need to work on doing things a bit more independently, because if they're going to treat you like a child, well, you're acting like a child. So you're both playing roles. If you want something to change, you have to change the role you're playing. And that will mean, you know, if every time you see your parents there's an argument, what are you doing also? They might trigger you, but are you reacting? Are you then having to become defensive? For something to change, you have to change. People get bored of creating arguments when arguments can't, when arguments can't grow. People won't argue with someone where an argument can't grow. If you can just, learn new behaviours where you're like, well, I'm sorry that's how you feel, but, until you can communicate in a healthy way, maybe we can't talk about this. Learning how you manage things is absolutely important. Keeping yourself away from family parties isn't always the healthiest. Because, I'm sorry, I must have hay fever still, so I don't know, it's raining, but I feel very clogged up. We can't expect anything to change externally, it has to change internally. And avoiding the triggers, because it triggers us, is actually not going to help us, because it just keeps reinforcing that there's a trigger there. So if you don't get triggered by your family, you'll get triggered by somebody else. So it's really... It's really important that you understand what your triggers are so that you can start slowly learning to be around those triggers and changing. Triggers will change when you change how you react to it, and it heals triggers within you as well. When you start to change how you deal with something, because your body's used to responding a certain way. It's used to suppressing or getting angry or getting agitated. So if you deal with that in a different way, you are going to be able to change how that trigger happens. And this doesn't happen overnight. This doesn't happen when you do it twice. You can't expect yourself to never be triggered again. It's about constantly becoming aware of self. So every time you go into an environment that you know has the potential to be a certain way, you become aware of self, aware of how you're showing up. Become aware of your mood. What is your mood? If you go to see them and you've not become aware of your mood and you're going in there agitated already, the likelihood of confrontation is going to be extremely high, because if you've not gone in there at a place of groundedness, you're going to be you're triggered to prior even going there. You're triggered at the thought of seeing them. So the minute they do one thing, that's it, you're blowing up, or that's it, you're running home, or that's it. And I know, because I've been there. So you have to learn how to manage yourself. You have to prep yourself, and this has to be done for a year, 2, 3, I don't know, and sometimes you have to just remove yourself from people. Other times, if you want to enjoy them, you have to really learn to manage your self-awareness about yourself at each time. Because there's going to be some people that you can never, they won't know. They won't listen to the word no. You will say to them, no, I'm not doing that for you. But they will end up manipulating in old ways and old systems so that you end up saying yes. So that no word doesn't mean anything. So when you become self-aware that actually, I love my friend, but they're a little bit manipulative. They go around the houses and end up getting me to do something. You can be a little bit more on guard so that when you know it's going that way, you can be aware of what they're doing. So that you can say, well, I'll have to get back to you on that, or no, I am really sorry. You know, but if you just go no, if you just try and say no straight away, or you have to understand the process of why you're saying no, the process of how they're getting you to say yes. It's really about becoming self-aware, which is a journey I'm taking you on in this group. Self-aware means we come to acknowledge your behaviours, not judge them, have compassion for them, awareness to them. They have come from somewhere. Understanding how a certain area, situation, or people make you feel. You know, if we're going to be around certain people that we have the potential to feel that way, become aware of how we feel when we're around them. Again, some people are never going to accept the word no. Or if you said to somebody, I'm sorry, I'm feeling like this, can you tell me why? And they blow up, you're never going to be able to have sometimes that kind of two-level conversation. With some people you can when you start to engage in that way, but with some people you can't. Some people are never going to be open to being challenged a little bit because their ego, their wounds are so defensive that they will just become defensive. So you have to learn to manage how you deal with it, meaning just don't take things personally. A lot of people say, unless it's directed at you. And if it's somebody that you really value, then challenge it and say, well, what do you mean by that? But when you understand the roles of people, you will know the genuineness, the levels of self-awareness in them. If you've got a friend that's a little bit more self-aware than a parent, you're going to be able to say to that friend, well, what do you mean by that? Or a friend who is a little bit more open. But if you've got a parent that's not self-aware, not willing to be open at all, if you try and have that dialogue with them, they will get defensive straight away. And there is just nothing you can do about that. So you have to recognise, well, how am I going to manage this? Well, actually, I'm not going to take it personally. Whatever you have to say, I'm not going to take personally. I have it with my mother-in-law. I'd never be able to have those dialogues with her because all she would say to me is, you're too sensitive. I'll take it how you want. If you want to take it that way, not my problem, your problem. So you can't even, opening up those kind of dialogues are just not even worth it. So majority of what she says goes in one ear and out the other. I can enjoy her for the person that she is, but I'm very aware of her judgments. I'm very aware of some of her traits, and I protect myself from them. You know, when we become self-aware, we can choose when we protect ourselves, but when we're unaware, that's when we're running around with wounds that we're trying to protect ourselves from that we don't know we're protecting ourselves from. And this might, hopefully this doesn't sound gobbledygook. I try to break it down as easy as I can, because the self-awareness stuff may seem particularly complicated because you have to hold two parallels in your mind. And that's the bit that I have found the most conflicting at times through my growth. Teaching the two parallels that you will have. You can have anger towards someone and still love them. You can struggle with someone's personality in some aspects, but enjoy other aspects of their personality. We don't need to clump everything together. Just because somebody has some traits that are not very nice doesn't mean they're a horrible person. So if we truly love them, we can start accepting the parts of them and kind of protecting ourselves from the other parts of them. And this is the navigation. Healing is about navigating. It's not about one size fits all. It's not about right or wrong. It's about navigating when to connect, navigating when to pull away, navigating when to be honest, navigating when to protect ourselves. And we can only ever do that from a state of awareness, okay? Primary thing I can ever say is state of awareness, because otherwise, unconsciously, we all have an unconscious. Sigmund Freud, a Swiss psychologist, created a theory. He wasn't the only one, but, you know, one of the main ones I've studied, created a theory of unconsciousness. Things that have happened to us sit in our unawareness back here, and they will lead us to have behaviours from here. So, you know, if you've been shouted at a lot in the past, If you get shouted at in the present, sometimes it can trigger unconsciously a wound of being shouted at, and it can make you get angry. But I will talk about triggers and wounds in another video. But understanding the concept of self-awareness is becoming self-aware. But that has to come from a place of not judging yourself as good or bad. You just are. There may be aspects you don't like about yourself at the moment, but that's okay. We're not here to eradicate them. There's parts of all of us, me included, Gandhi, everyone, that potentially could be deemed bad. I mean, let's look at a spiritual teacher who was a Buddhist who kissed a child on the lips. To him, his culture deemed that okay and safe and spiritual teachings. To other people who look at it through a scared perspective, I mean, I don't want to judge it too much, but lots of people will view it paedophilia. Lots of people will view it disgusting, because it depends on the lens that you're looking through. If people are looking at everything through scared and paedophilia and sexual exploitation and things like that, then everything we see, which could be generally just love, we could deem. And while it is inappropriate in this day and age because of the idea, like, you know, the lens we're looking things through, not everything is what we're perceiving it to be. And I have to say that not everything is what we're perceiving it to be. Because by challenging our notions of what we think and feel and allowing ourselves to see it from a different perspective, whilst still holding boundaries and awareness to how it's affecting us, that is how we navigate healing. I'm hoping this video has brought you something. Every time I bring a video, I try to stay on topic, because I know I like to talk, I know I like to bring all this stuff, and I don't want to mismatch bits. But I'm hoping that there's something that you've been able to take from this video, and you're a little bit more aware on how to potentially navigate through people pleasing and understanding how to be a bit more assertive. All my love to you.